Welcome to a reading of Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. The exciting thing about this poem is that it is a dramatic monologue. It is not a lyric poem. The genre of dramatic monologue was first perfected by Robert Browning in the Victorian age. There is a marvelous interaction between the reader and the writer in a dramatic monologue. In the end, we feel as if we have been introduced to the persona in the center of the poem. And by the end of the poem, we feel as if we have gleaned a secret side to the persona, which has inadvertently been revealed. We also feel as if the persona includes other listeners into the conversation. The question is, who is Ulysses? Is he a hero, or is he an anti-hero? Let's find out. Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It little profits that an idle king by the still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone, on shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyads vex the dim sea. I am become a name. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honoured of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch where through gleams that untravelled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things, and vile it were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself. And this grey spirit, yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the sceptre and the isle. Well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labour, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centred in the sphere of common duties, decent, not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and fought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honour and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end. Some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be the gulfs will wash us down. It may be that we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in the old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Welcome back. Who then is Ulysses? Tennyson drew on two sources for this poem. The first one is Homer's Odyssey. Odysseus is another name for Ulysses, and this one presents a fabulous Greek hero who had many adventures. The second source is Dante's Ulisse or Ulysses. This one depicts Ulysses as derelict and as being shamefully negligent of his duties. When the poem opens, the central figure, the persona, is Ulysses. And he has come home 10 years after the Trojan War. Now, most warriors came home immediately once the Trojan War was over. The Trojan War was 10 years long, but not Ulysses. He carried on traveling around the Mediterranean Sea with his mariners, meeting gods and goddesses, and you've got to realize that this was a completely different world to the one we are familiar with. Nowadays, even if you travel far and wide, we have our cell phones, we have WhatsApp, we can, at the touch of a button, communicate with our family far away across the world. However, in this time, travel was problematic, to say the least. If you wanted to send a message to someone, you would literally have to send a messenger out on an arduous voyage and hope that he would be able to find the person and then still make his way back. So this wasn't really feasible. When the poem opens, Ulysses has finally made his way home 20 years later. You can imagine that his little son, Telemachus, has literally grown up without a father. And even his wife, Penelope, had her own problems. When he was missing for so many years, she had to deal with numerous suitors who wanted to marry her and who fancied themselves in the position of king of Ithaca. So what did she do? Well, her name has literally become synonymous with fidelity. What did she do? She began to weave a beautiful cloth. And she said that when the cloth was finished, she would choose a suitor. So every day she could be seen weaving, but every night she would unpick the work she had done, and every day she would redo it. And as a result, the cloth was never woven. Well, when the poem begins, Ulysses has just returned home after 20 years of being away. Let's see this Ulysses. Let's read the first 5 lines. Ulysses then. It little profits that an idle king by the still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. Well, he's not the most cheerful person, is he? He is discontented, a grumpy old man, to say the least, grumbling about everything. He feels that there's nothing to be gained, and he feels as if he is sitting about as an idle king. Remember, he's been traveling, he's been active, he's been having adventures for 20 years. Now, although he's king of Ithaca, he feels idle. He refers to the still hearth. The oxymoron used there, the hearth, is still. The fire is cold. It suggests there is no passion. He talks about his own island, of which he is king, as having barren crags. So he expresses his disapproval of everything. It's as if nothing can grow there. The word barren can also be an implicit reference to his wife, to whom he refers as matched with an aged wife. She has grown old. Well, this would certainly give us an opportunity for a feminist reading, wouldn't it? If she is old, well, so is he. And he continues to talk about his life as king. I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race. So mete and dole. Well, mete and dole has a kind of pedestrian rhythm, doesn't it? A pedestrian and monotonous rhythm to it. He is bored at having to measure and weigh out, as if with small quantities, laws, day in and day out. He is bored by this. He finds it tedious. And actually, experiences in a poet's own life could influence his writing as well. And Tennyson, at the time when he wrote this poem, found himself in the unenviable position of having to take over control of his family, of having to help out. Now you've got to realize that he had a huge family, in that he was one of 10 siblings, and he was the eldest. And his father died at this stage of his life, and he found himself having to take charge of his mother and his 10 siblings, and of being crammed into a very small house, and of having to take over the responsibility of running the household, which he certainly found very tedious, and of having to give up his studies in Cambridge. So this meet and dole could convey his own boredom at having to give up the studies he so enjoyed and having to take over the running of the household. In the context of the poem, however, he says, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race. So he refers to his own people, now that he hasn't seen them for 20 years, as savage. So he belittles them. He sees them as little more than animals that hoard and sleep and feed. Animals that hoard and sleep and feed. He despises their limited existence. It contrasts with what he sees as the noble experiences and the vital experiences he had when he traveled. And he says that these people simply hoard like animals and sleep and feed. They're in this monotonous round of existence and know not me. Notice the extremely heavy and regular iambic beat of that fifth line. And know not me. You can see how resentful he is of his people. His people have forgotten all about him. But it's more than that. It's as if they don't know him. It's as if they can't possibly understand who he is. Notice how restless Ulysses is. I cannot rest from travel. And he uses images of drink and eating, things that are essential to life, to describe his memories of his adventures and his travels. He says, I will drink life to the lees. So he uses a metaphor of drinking the wine to the very dregs, to the sediment left in the glass. He wants to experience life to the full. And he says, all times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone. And of course, when he refers to those that loved him, he is referring not to his family, but to the mariners who traveled with him. And he ends up saying, I am become a name which contrasts, of course, with no, not me, with the fact that he felt that his own people couldn't possibly know who he was. Out there in the larger world, and of course the reader's imagination is also freed up from the narrow existence on Ithaca at the beginning of the poem to the excitement and the vitality of his descriptions of travel. And he ends up saying, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. And notice how he presents war to us. Here, war is glamorized, isn't it? With the sounds of those clashing swords against the shields, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. Are you seduced by the heroic sounds of battle in this poem? Swept away on these intoxicating words? Or do you think that war is actually sordid and dysfunctional? How do you perceive war? Now, I know that in your IB exams, you are also going to be asked questions that could ask you to compare texts. And it would be interesting for you to compare the presentation of war in this poem to the presentation of war in the modern poem, Dulce et Decorum Est, written by Wilfred Owen. Let's look briefly at how war is presented here. This poem is clearly a study in realism. It shows the horror of war from a very personal viewpoint. It is harshly realistic. And as we know, Wilfred Owen himself fought in the First World War, and he was only 25 when he died in trench warfare. So it is a very bleak vision that he gives us. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind. So in this bleak, harshly realistic vision of war, none can escape the horror. And then we have the urgent, sudden command, gas, gas, quick, boys. And the frenzy and the frantic fumbling of the soldiers trying to fit their clumsy helmets just in time. However, one is left floundering like a man in fire or lime. And the soldiers watch helplessly as their colleague is exposed to this dreadful mustard gas attack. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. And the poem itself becomes unpoetic, giving us obscene details which convey the terror of this brutal attack. And he says, if in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, his hanging face, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling forth from the froth-corrupted lungs, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. This is Wilfred Owen angrily exposing as a lie the falsehoods of propaganda, the falsehoods of glamorizing war. It could also be particularly interesting to compare Ulysses to The Cry of South Africa by Olive Schreiner. Alfred Lord Tennyson was Poet Laureate after William Wordsworth. Queen Victoria was on the throne, and British colonies were in a large portion of the world. War, of course, was glamorized, as we have seen. For always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honoured of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. At this stage, perhaps Britain was holding on to empire, as Ulysses holds on to travel, although perhaps the morality of it was slipped. In The Cry of South Africa, Olive Schreiner passionately denounces the presence of the British fighting in South Africa during the Anglo-Boer War in 1900. She personifies South Africa. Give me back my dead, they who by cop and fountain first saw the light upon my rocky breast. The words, give me back my dead, are repeated throughout the poem, and they gather in intensity. Give me back my dead, whom thou hast riven from me by arms of men loud called from earth's farthest bound. She passionately repudiates the right of the British to fight those born and bred in South Africa. South Africa is portrayed as a heartbroken mother who has lost her children to the war. And perhaps the image of a mother's loss is also written from Olive Schreiner's own heartache and suffering as she had experienced such a loss when she lost her first child, a daughter, a few hours after she was born. The setting of the poem is made clear in the note at the bottom of the poem. Wagenaar's kraal, 3 sisters, May the 9th, 1900. The cry of South Africa then may be seen as openly and passionately patriotic, whereas in Ulysses, patriotism against the backdrop of the British Empire may be subtly gleaned between the lines. Overtly, Ulysses himself glamorizes war, whereas Dulce et Decorum est gives a harshly realistic portrayal of the horrors of war. By putting texts in conversation with each other, opportunities to uncover profound insights may be presented. And at the center of the poem, Ulysses looms large. It is as if Tennyson himself is seduced by the tantalizing and heroic-sounding celebration of strength in the figure of Ulysses. When he returns home, he is an old man. And how does one face up to the challenges of old age? How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use. In this metaphor, Ulysses compares himself to a rusty old sword, which has fallen into disuse, as though to breathe were life. Ulysses cannot accept this notion of life. And yet, perhaps there is something Faustian about his unquenchable desire for knowledge and adventure. All experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untravelled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. Had his quest been for wisdom, truth, understanding, would he not better have fitted that mould of hero? Yet the figure of Ulysses cannot simply be summed up either as hero or as derelict. On the one hand, he seems to choose life. Life piled on life were all too little, even though he knows that little remains he rejects idleness with vehement repulsion and shame. And vile it were for some 3 sons to store and hoard myself, and this grey spirit, yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. Is Ulysses actively, bravely, and nobly affronting death, as Homer's Odyssey suggests, or is he shamefully and negligently turning his back on his duties towards his family and his people, reneging on his duty as father and as king? He has neglected his duties for 20 years, and once more he chooses to walk away. And what of his attitude to Telemachus, his son? There are those who see his attitude as affectionate. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the sceptre and the isle, well loved of me. Yet, looking more closely at the words he uses, he comes across as haughty, patronizing, and condescending. He speaks of him as discerning to fulfill this labour, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people. He implies that his son will do his best to carry out his duties for the useful and the good. He is dutiful, fair, reliable, and just. Ulysses cannot fault him. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties. It is as if he finds him fit only for the undistinguished, ordinary, dull, and mundane tasks. He clearly values his own contribution more than he values that of his son. He works his work, I mine. It is difficult not to be swept away by the magic of iambic pentameter in his appeal to his mariners as the poem slips into the vision of the future. The excitement in "There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail" contrasts markedly with the tight-lipped rejection of what he perceives as the dullness of his son's work. He works his work, I mine. Yet there gloom the dark, broad seas. Immediately strikes a dark, ominous note. On the one hand, he seems to be offering his mariners heroism, even in old age. You and I are old. Old age age hath yet his honour and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men who strove with gods. And yet the imagery becomes increasingly dark. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. The long vowel sounds slow down the pace. The close of day and the sounds of the deep anticipate their deaths. The words, "Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world," and the famous last stirring words of the poem, "One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield," seem to try and persuade them that they will be heroes. But is he leading them to a happy and fulfilled life, or to death and damnation? He is tempting them to selfishly leave their wives and families and to indulge themselves. The knowledge they gain on their voyage is empty and will not benefit anyone. It is for this reason that Dante places Ulysses in the eighth circle of the Inferno, hell, with the evil counsellors who deceive others. The poem ends paradoxically. For Tennyson and the Victorians, knowledge is about progress and discovery and improvements, and there is a feeling of optimism. For Dante, in the Middle Ages, all knowledge begins with faith, and the story of Dante's Ulisse ends with death, until the sea closed over us, over Ulysses and his mariners. Please remember to click the bell below and subscribe, and visit me at my website, formuse.org.